Hello there everyone, it is Toby from TIJ Music and welcome to a brand new video. Today it is time for an album review, and today, as you might have well guessed from the title, the description, etc. and the thumbnail, we are going to review the Police's final album, Synchronicity. Now, I thought for these reviews I'll do something a bit different. We've got the vinyl album in the background on the wall there. We've got the CD, which I'll show you. I'll also show you the vinyl very quickly. This is from the Every Movie We Make Studio Remasters box set, which I got last year. I had a look at that on the channel, so after this, I'm sure I'll leave that video in the end screen for you to go and have a look at. The CD, very similar to the LP in terms of the artwork, etc., and the design. Obviously, we've all 10 songs on the one side of CD if you want to get really untechnical like that. Obviously, the LP is the same, but with the first 6 tracks on one side and the final 4 tracks on the other side. I'll just quickly show you the LP because I know that a lot of people like to see the vinyl. Obviously in the very good protective sleeve, a cracking cover, and we'll move on to that in just a second. I have got the sleeve outside of the album, so that's the back cover pretty much. I think it's a mirror of the front cover, obviously, but just with different colours, and I'll move on to that in a little while. We've got the sleeve with the lyrics here. I think it's got all the lyrics on. Yeah, it's got all the lyrics on there. And then a picture of the guys on the back. Obviously, 3 of the best of friends at this point. I wouldn't quite say that, but there you go. So, as you can see, very similar to the CD, although this is in a black background, the first side, and then side 2, tracks 7 to 10, with the white label. I'll put the vinyl away, though, now. But yeah, let's talk about the Police's Synchronicity. First off, though, I want to apologise, we haven't had a review for a long time round here. And after I did the box set review at Christmas last year, I said, well, what we'll do, we'll review some of the Police albums, and here we are nearly 11 months later, and I'm just getting round, well, 10 months later, and I'm just getting round to reviewing the first one. But let's have a look at Synchronicity from 1983. Now, I'm going to open it out there straight away, and that's the dog barking to provide a bit of background. I'm going to throw it out there straight away that Synchronicity is, I wouldn't say by far, but I think Synchronicity is my favourite Police album, purely because it's the most well-rounded Police album. I think it's no secret that Police are a singles band. They're a lot more than that to people like probably you and me, but at the heart, they're pretty much a singles band, and I feel like with some of the albums, I think Ghost of the Machine, particularly Zenyatta Mondatta, I think Zenyatta Mondatta is an album that the singles are fantastic, but the other material, in my opinion, the majority of it's filler. But for this album in particular, probably in regards to Blanc and Atlantis de More, but this album in particular, there is no filler on this album. This is an absolutely fantastic album, and you could well construe it as a concept album. But before we get into the review, let's have a quick look at some of the background about this album. As I said, the 5th and final studio release from the Police, released in 1983. And as I might have alluded to, this was the band's most successful release before massive singles. King of Pain, Wrapped Around Your Finger, Synchronicity II, and of course the absolutely huge Every Breath You Take. And the album's title and the material came from Arthur Koestler, his book, The Roots of Coincidence. And on the front cover, it's more visible on the vinyl, but I'll show you on the CD. You can see in this third picture along, Sting is actually reading Jung's Synchronicity Theorem. And basically that theorem's all about that events are meaningful coincidences. They occur with no casual relationship, but seem to be meaningful related. Thank you, Wikipedia, for that one. I'm not going to go into that anymore because I like to look at the background of the albums, but I think you might agree with me that ultimately, at the heart of everything, the music is the most important thing. I think unless you're reviewing somebody like Pink Floyd that are really deep into those meaningful stuff, yeah, we'll just look at the music as a general rule, but I like to look at a bit of the background. And as I said, this is effectively an arguable concept album. You could debate that, but the great thing with this one is some concept albums, you can only enjoy it as a concept album. If you look at Pink Floyd's The Wall, if I was to listen to Empty Spaces, for example, from that album, it doesn't work as a solitary track. It blends into the whole album. But with this, I think all of the tracks, to be honest, you can listen to as single tracks without taking away from the experience, if that makes sense. They work in an album sense, they also work in a single sense, and obviously they do, with 4 out of the 10 tracks being big singles. 1984 Grammy Awards, the album was nominated for 5 awards, including Album of the Year, won 3 of them, and at the time of the release, many people, well, not necessarily many people, but the critics said the Police are the biggest band in the world. And obviously it was all to crash down after this because the guys we're just so far away from each other. They'd had enough of each other, and to be fair, they'd recorded, what, 5 albums in the space of 5 or 6 years, and that's bound to happen, and the 3 band members recorded their parts in separate rooms. You've got Stuart Copeland on the drums in the dining room, Sting in the control room of the studio, and Andy Summers being the actual one in the actual studio. And according to co-producer Hugh Padgham, I think it's Padgham, this was done for 2 reasons. Now, the first one was for social reasons, which is bang on. The other reason, which I'll go, well, pull the other one, is to make sure that there's the best sound for each instrument. Yeah. Alright, pull the other one. This was done completely for social reasons. There was a massive rift between these 3. I think particularly between Stuart Copeland and Sting, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we'll touch on it now. Subsequent overdubs, that again were only done with 1 guy at the studio at each time, and during the recording of Every Breath You Take, the biggest track on the album, Sting and Copeland nearly came to blows, and the co-producer Hugh Padgham nearly quit the project. So thank God that didn't happen, or else we wouldn't have had this brilliant album. Obviously released in 1983 by an A&M Records, and it was absolutely huge. One of the biggest albums of the 80s, I think, and one of the best albums of the 80s as well. So without any further ado, let's get onto the tracks. Now, all of these tracks here were written by Sting, except where I point it out. I'm going to point it out now. Mother was written by Andy Summers. It was effectively a solo track, if you like. And Miss Credenko was written by Stuart Copeland. The only other one that really is worth touching on is a CD bonus track, Murder by Numbers, which was the B-side, I think, to Synchronicity II. I've got it on my notes, so we'll refer to it as I go through. But I think Murder by Numbers was co-written by Sting and Stuart Copeland. But apart from that, the majority of this album is written by Sting, and Sting's such an underrated songwriter, as we'll point out throughout. So, the first track, Synchronicity number 1. A real nice classic 80s new wave track to start the album. It hints at what's to come, and as I've said earlier, it's not obvious, but it's effectively a concept album, and this introduces the concept quite nicely. I don't think it's the best album on the track, but it's a good police track and hints what's to come. It's a good track, but it's nowhere near as good as Synchronicity 2. Second track on the album then. Oh, by the way, I'm going to give that one an 8 out of 10. If you guys have not watched any of my reviews before, what I do, I tend to give a rating out of 10 for each track, and then at the end of the review, compile them together and give an overall rating. The second track on the album is Walking in Your Footsteps, and I think this is probably the weak link on the album, and I think it's the only track, if I came up on my driving playlist or whatever, it's the only track I'd willingly skip. I tolerate it in terms of playing the album as a whole, because obviously it fits into the whole concept, but I think it's a little bit weak from an arrangement point of view, and I don't know whether that was intended to be a little bit basic. It just doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't really keep me too interested, but, you know, it's a decent track. It's not terrible at all. But like the first track, it does set up the album nicely. Therefore, it fits nicely as an album track, but that's it. So I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10, which I think is harsh. You know, I've given 7s, 8s for much worse tracks. Not worse tracks, but maybe weaker tracks. But I just think this one is in the concept, not the concept, but not the concept, but in the whole bigger picture of the album, compared to if I'm giving 10 for this, 8 for that, I think this has to be a little bit lower, so I think this one is a 6 out of 10. We then move on to track number 3 on the A-side, Oh My God, which Sting actually wrote this one in 1976 for his first band. I think it was his first band, Last Exit, and it was adapted, of course, for the Synchronicity sound, and lyrics were added, lyrics were chopped and changed, the arrangement was changed, and they added a saxophone, which I was chuffed at, because a saxophone is an instrument I'm a real killer for. I love a saxophone, even overkill with you know, saxophone. I just love a saxophone, it's brilliant. And basically this looks at Sting's not a religious man, and it looks at his disbelief of God in this track, and if you take away the whole deep and meaningful stuff of this track, it's a great groovy 80s track, with plenty of 80s synth feel, and you'll notice it does copy the last verse from Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, of course a big single from was it the previous album, Ghost in the Machine? That did come after Zenyatta Mondata, didn't it? I'm sure it did. That was 81, wasn't it? Mondata was 80. Yeah, sure it did. And this is actually a verse that comes up again in Sting's solo track 7 Days. That whole, it's a big enough umbrella. Sorry, I nearly went into singing then, but nobody wants to hear that. It's a big enough umbrella, but it always ends up in me. Always me that ends up getting wet. I completely botched that, didn't I? But yeah, it's an interesting track. Not the best track again in the concept of the album, because some of these tracks are fantastic. So if it's not completely fantastic, I feel like I'm a little bit tunnel vision like with this album, that unless it's brilliant, I rank it a bit lower. But again, it's a fantastic track, I think. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. A really interesting track. Now we move on to track 4. A really interesting track, a different one. Very different in the concept of the album, I think. Mother, track number 4, written completely by Andy Summers, the guitarist, of course, from the album, and a rare lead vocal appearance from Andy Summers. So it's effectively like a solo track, and it uses the metaphor of his girlfriend being like his mother, and the desperation from his vocals are excellent. And I think that some people who like this album, because, again, obviously them being one of the biggest bands in the world, they were a mainstream band, and some people looking at this track who maybe are softer rock fans, more new wave synth pop, would go, oh my god, what a row! But I think it's brilliant. I think it's really, really excellent. It's desperate. It's brilliant. And this one's got to be a 9 out of 10. It's not quite a 10, but it's very, very close. Even sort of towards 9.5. But it's a really excellent track. Now, I thought to round off side 1, but no, it's not to round off side 1, because Synchronicity II is indeed on side 1 as well, track number 6. That's always thrown me. Obviously, it's done for reasons of lengths of tracks on the album. But I always thought Synchronicity 1 opened up side 1 on the vinyl, and Synchronicity 2 opened up side 2 on the vinyl. And actually, it's not the case. Synchronicity 2 is track 6 on the vinyl. But obviously, when you're looking at the CD format, it doesn't give it, it doesn't matter an apple or a pear. But anyway, track number 5 is not Synchronicity 2. Track number 5 is Miss Kodenko, and it's the only official writing contribution on the album from Stuart Copeland, the drummer. Excellent subtle drum playing from Copeland, and great guitar licks from Andy Summers here. Not the best track, it's a bit of a short length, but again, it adds to the atmosphere, so I think this one is a 7 out of 10. So we now move on to the second half of the album again. Not the second side yet until track number 7, but the second half of the album. And track number 6 really starts to have a noticeable shift to longer track lengths on the album. Of course, I'm talking about Synchronicity II. It's brilliant storytelling here. This isn't something I knew till a few years ago, but effectively it discusses a man's paranoia. His work life's a disaster, every meeting with his so-called superiors, a humiliating kick in the crack, and his anguish at his life appearing in that whole dark Scottish lock feel to it. It's a definite 10 out of 10. It's a classic. It's a police classic, and I did dig out for this review my dad's original 12-inch of Synchronicity 2. Of course, it was a single, and it had to be a 12-inch single, really, because it was 5 minutes in length. Once Upon a Daydream on the B-side of this, a nice trio of pictures of the band on the back and the front cover, but I thought I'd show that. I'll put that along with the album on the, I think we'll call that album corner now, but I'm waiting for those to drop in about 2 minutes and cause chaos. But yeah, an absolutely fantastic track. The 12-inch, as we've just seen there, went to number 17 in the UK singles chart and number 16 in the Billboard Hot 100. And this song was described by People Weekly, not People's Weekly. You can't have a multiple of peoples. There's no plural for people. The plural for people is people, not peoples, I think. But yeah, the song was described by People Weekly as aggressive and steely, and that's a description I'd go along with, as long as they're giving that as a positive description, because it's got that aggression to it. It's absolutely fantastic. As I said, it's a police classic, and if you couldn't tell, that's a definite 10 out of 10. Right, that rounds off side 1. I'm going to move the CD over there as well, actually, now. But that rounds off side 1. We're going to look now at track number 7, and I did think before I do this, I thought, do I really need to talk about this? But yes, it's an album review, so I do need to talk about it. I'm talking about Every Breath You Take. One of the biggest tracks of all time, really, I think you have to say. This is a 10 out of 10. It's one of those you don't have to hear ever again, but it's a police classic. No doubt it's the most known track by them. Maybe in 2020 it might be Don't Stand So Close to Me, but of all time, I think this, or maybe Every Little Thing She Does, is the most known track by the Police. And I think we all know about the rather disturbing topic area of the stalker and the real nasty nature of the track, but it's a very minimalistic arrangement, and it works so well this time, and it reflects Sting's personal situation. He'd really recently split up from his first wife, Frances Tumulty, and in a discussion with NME, Sting said it's not a sad song, it's a nasty song, it's particularly evil, it's about jealousy, surveillance and ownership. And as I said before, Sting and Copeland came to blows during the recording of the track. The co-producer, Hugh Padgham, nearly quit the project. thank heavens he didn't. Just a few stats about this track. This track was huge. Released as a single, of course, 1983. I talked about it earlier. Murder by Numbers was the B-side. It was later a CD bonus track. And again, just a note, it's a great track, but I'm not going to include it because it wasn't on the original album. Reached number 1 in the UK, US, Canada, Israel, Ireland and South Africa. And in a 1983 Rolling Stones critic and readers poll, it was voted Song of the Year. In the US, it was the best-selling single of 1983 and the 5th best-selling single of the decade in the US. And Billboard also ranked it as the number 1 song in 1983. And it did become the biggest worldwide hit, really, in 1983, particularly in the American and British market. Topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 8 weeks. It was the band's only number 1 on that chart. Obviously, they had a few more number 1s in the UK. And it did top the UK single chart for 4 weeks. It also topped the Billboard Top Tracks chart for 9 weeks. I mean, can't they just have over here? Can't they just have one singles chart? No, it has to be all fancy and 10 different charts in the US. Again, to any American viewers, I apologise, but it does wind me up, that does. Just have one bloody chart. But yeah, you can't really say too much more about Every Breath You Take. It's a fantastic track. It's just awesome. You just need to listen to it, which I don't think I need to listen to it again, just to realise how fantastic it is, how the members come together. It is absolutely tremendous. So then we move on to track number 8, King of Pain. And this one, again, 10 out of 10. Another excellent bit of songwriting from Sting. It reflects on the pain in Sting's soul at this point because, again, you've got that recent splitting up, divorce from his first wife, and he was in a bit of a dark place at this point. I don't think that helped us the atmosphere within the band, and it's really a lot of metaphors of situations which need outside help. The whole, there's a blue whale beached by a spring's tide's ebb. A spring tide's ebb, not a spring's tides. I see I'm getting all muddled up. You know what I mean. And it's another Police classic, and I think side 2 is a real kind of mini greatest hits collection of the Police. If I was approached by someone and they said, right, I want to start listening to the Police, where the hell do I start? I'd give them the CD, probably not the vinyl. I'd say, right, listen to the whole album, obviously, but 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Listen to those, and your quid's in. Because it's effectively a mini greatest hits collection, that second side of the album. Again, I'm getting mixed up. It's 7, 8, 9, 10, but for the purpose of this review, let's just pretend that track number 6, Synchronicity II, is on the second side. So, the penultimate track of this album, Wrapped Around Your Finger, again, another 10 out of 10, and you might be surprised to hear this is actually probably my favourite track on the album. It is really excellent. There are a lot of highlights to this album, but the slower tempo really brings these songs to life, and it gives it a real certain atmosphere, doesn't it? And there are links to Greek mythology and all that, you could say, nonsense on this track. And it's a real observation of control and actually turning the tables on that control. Again, it starts with, I'll be wrapped around your finger. It ends with, you'll be wrapped around my finger. It's fantastic. It really is fantastic. And again, it's that whole, you will find your servant is your master. It's an aggressive track, it is, but without being explicitly aggressive. And another successful single, went to number 7 in the UK, number 8 in the US. And again, probably my favourite track from the album. So, finishing off the album, we get to track number 10. Tea in the Sahara. This is a 9 out of 10, not quite a 10, but much like Mother, it's another very solid track. And I don't think not a lot is said of the way that the Police blend together so well, and this track really shows all of that. The killer bass riff, the doom 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 doom. Yeah, it's a really good bass riff from Sting. Summer's great guitar work, the same for Copeland's drums, and it's a little bit like Every Breath You Take. It's very minimalistic, but it's effective. It's not my favourite track from the album, but it's a great one nonetheless, an 8 out of 10. So that's the 10 tracks. So, what's the verdict on this album? You can tell because of all the 10s, the 9s I've been thrashing out that it's going to be a very high rating. And it certainly is. It's an 8.7 out of 10 it comes out at, which I think is about right, because as I said at the start, it's probably the most well-rounded The Police album. And as I said earlier, I don't think there's any secret The Police were a singles band, but this was, I think, the only album, maybe Outland Us More in regards to Blanc can be regarded as similar, but I think it's the only solid, concrete album that was consistent. Again, there are a few that aren't as good as the others here, but I think if you compare those outliers from this album compared to some of the other albums, the outliers from this album are much better than the outliers from some of the other albums. And it's a series of excellent singles, and the album tracks are great as well. And I think it's an album I'll always enjoy. And it's different to the rest of the catalogue, and that's what makes it unique. And as I said, this was absolutely huge around the world. So, what's your favourite Police album? Is it this? Is it something else? Do you think this album's a load of rubbish? Because I'm quite happy for people to disagree with me. If we all had the same music taste, it would be rather boring. It's a bit like cars. It's like anything in life. If we all enjoyed the same thing, it would be a bit boring. But this has been my first review for a long while. I have really enjoyed it, and hopefully, as we get up to the Christmas season, more time inside, it's going to be dark outside earlier. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep up with this channel and maybe provide weekly uploads. And of course, if you guys are interested in album reviews, top 10s, leave suggestions for those down in the comments. And if it's something that I think would work well, and something I'm confident in talking about, I will definitely cover those in a video. But that's kind of where we're going to finish it today. If you haven't heard the Police Synchronicity, go out and listen to it, and I'd love to hear your retrospective comments on the album in the comments section, because this is a fantastic album. You know, the Police are a brilliant band. I think understated by quite a lot of people as just a singles band, but really there were a lot more than that, as I think this album and the rest of their catalogue definitely shows. But leave a like if you enjoyed that. I always appreciate it when you guys leave a like. Leave your comments as well. What do you think of the album? What do you think of the Police? Anything Police related. Not the boys in blue, but the boys in blue, yellow and red here. But yeah, thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed. I've got plenty of content, fingers crossed, I say, coming up. Hopefully this is a catalyst for doing weekly content from now. But I've been Toby from TIJ Music. Thank you for your company today, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye for now. Remember to continue to stay safe, of course, during this terrible time with the pandemic, but music just makes it that little bit better, doesn't it? Thank you for watching, and goodbye.